Thank you for tuning in to the Logic of God podcast. I'm Cody.
I'm Gina.
And I'm Ben.
If you're returning, thank you for coming back. And if you are a new guest, welcome.
Moving on to verse 13. Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. Okay. So Jacob says that he will dwell at the shore of the sea, but he doesn't actually live on the shore. Is it that our geography is wrong, or is this more poetic language? I would argue that it's poetic language. Yeah.
Explain.
So he lives between the Sea of Galilee and the Mediterranean trade routes. So he has water near him, and those are important for trade routes. But I think this is more referring to his spheres of influence and not literal borders. And then the Midrash Rabbah says Zebulun was financially blessed so that they could support Issachar's Torah studies. Zebulun funded rabbis. Issachar studied Torah. So that is Jewish tradition. That is not biblical, but it makes sense because Zebulun would have gotten wealthy because of those trade routes and the proximity to Sidon. So that's all I have for Zebulun. Oh, one more thing about Zebulun. We are on the fifth son. So far, all of these are Leah's sons. So there is something to this pattern here. We're going to continue to tease it out. Also, the Bible lists Zebulun before Issachar, but Issachar was actually older than Zebulun. So why did Jacob switch his younger two of Leah's sons for the inheritance? Because at first it starts out with like birth order, but now we're out of birth order. So what in the world is going on? We will continue to tease it out. Part of it is the structure of the poetry based on the ancient Near East context, but part of it is also, I think, more geographical in terms of inheritance rather than age, rather than who their mom is. So let's move on in the scriptures. Also, the fact that they're switched like that drives scholars crazy because they really can't understand. So it's just a guess. Okay, so we did Zebulun. Now we're verse 14. Issachar is a strong donkey, crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good, that the land was pleasant, so he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant at forced labor. What? He became a slave?
They all became slaves.
Yeah. So calling him a donkey was praise. And when I was thinking through this at first, I was like, is he comparing him to a donkey because Esau was a wild donkey of a man? And no, it seems like this is actually praise. He seems content with farming and safe spaces, with fertile lands associated with scholarship, tribe of very strong workers. And some of the traditions and scholarship behind Issachar was that forced labor is not usually interpreted as a bad thing for this tribe because sacrifices were made for peace. Farmers usually had to rely on more powerful outside forces for protection. So a lot of the scholars don't believe that the forced labor is necessarily a bad thing. I would even go as far as arguing that maybe this is hinting at what's to come with Egypt and the Israelites being enslaved. And as they go out, maybe that has something to do with it. But either way, it's not interpreted as a bad thing, even though it feels really yucky to me. Any other thoughts? Okay, these are quick ones. Dan is interesting. Okay, so Dan is the first son named that was not from Leah. And that's interesting to me because in the verses, it says, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels so that his rider falls backward. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. So the very first part of Dan's blessing or prophecy in verse 16 says that he is one of the tribes of Israel. And yet in Revelation, he is gone.
I think this is a hint because I also looked at the Dan shall judge, that is more a reference to will cause judgment, not be a judge. Like you hear judge, he's going to be a judge. He's going to be over the brothers. And no, he's going to cause judgment. And it kind of fulfills that later on. And there's the serpent imagery here, which also this is another constellation in the north. The Antichrist is thought to come up from the north. So there is sects of Christianity and Judaism who thinks it comes from the tribe of Dan.
Like Irenaeus, is that how you say his name? That was his idea, that Dan might produce the Antichrist because of the serpent imagery.
Yeah. So again, interesting constellation connections here, like also with Zebulun, the ship. Maybe that's more of a reference to the constellation.
I do think it's interesting because there are Bible verses that encourage people to be like snakes. So it's confusing here. Is he saying Dan is going to be super wicked, or is he saying he's going to be crafty like a snake because it's okay to be crafty like a snake? And quite frankly, Jacob was crafty like a snake at parts in his life.
And he also has heel grabbing portion here. So this, I do think, is connecting to Jacob, and the deceitful ways of Jacob early on is connected to Dan here.
It's also hard to not make the connection to the curse of the serpent in early Genesis, where it talks about you will strike his heel and he will bruise your head. It's also worth noting that the word for serpent here is Nahash. But also it's worth noting that it can sometimes just mean serpent. It's not that this is exclusively used as a term for the devil or for evil or something like that. It is frequently used to that effect, but not always.
And a lot of scholars tie this prophecy into Samson and say that maybe Jacob is referencing prophetically the line of Dan through Samson and that story of wickedness, but also redemption at the end, and could be why he calls on God here when he says, I wait for your salvation, O Lord. This is the only line in this entire kind of prayer poem where God is called upon. So that's also very interesting. And I think if we think through this being prophecy, makes sense that Jacob would be worried or scared for Dan and just the world in a world where Dan exists.
Yeah, it's also weird if you look at the literal word for word interpretation of this verse in 18, it's for your salvation I have waited, Yahweh. Again, we're talking about prophecy, so the tenses are odd. It's tough to say if he's talking about something right now is I've waited up to this point and this vision has given me comfort, or oh Lord, in the future we have awaited your salvation and it has come, or if this is some kind of lament. It's a bit ambiguous, but you're right, Gina. It's worth pointing out this is the only time he does this. So what he sees of Dan's future clearly moves him. And I do think this is much closer to a lament than anything else.
Agreed.
But I think as we go down the list moving forward, it becomes more joyful. So moving on to Gad.
This isn't joyful.
I think it gets more joyful.
It does.
So verse 19, raiders shall raid Gad, but he shall raid at their heels. That's all he gets. Gad gets very little. Now, this is where the pattern for me got interesting because one, it's a very unique poetic, like linguistic pattern for this chapter because it goes into a Ugaritic poetic structure of A, B, B, A. So we have Bilhah, then we have Bilhah again for the mothers. So they're out of order. They are structured uniquely. And there are some different ideas of why, but also in the words that are used here in the original language, it feels like Jacob is being almost playful. So it says, Gad, the tribe's name Gadud, a troop, a raiding band, and then Yegudenu shall raid him, and then Yagud, he shall raid. So the line reads like a pun. Gad will be gadded by gadders, but he will gad them back.
Gad's going to get got, but he's going to be going and getting the gets forgotten.
So I thought that was funny because this, for me, is that playful side of Jacob where he like switches the hands on his grandsons and he's, yeah, Gad, you're going to have it tough, especially looking at the geography of where Gad lands. It is bordered by quite a few hostile territories. And so we know he's going to be at risk for getting attacked frequently. And we see that in 1 Chronicles 12:8. They are described as mighty and experienced warriors, expert with shield and spear, faces like lions, swifter than gazelles. We know that they're great warriors. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, what Jacob is saying. It's like a funny thing. And he's saying, but you got this. It's interesting.
It's the rap breakdown of the song.
Gad will be gadded by gadders, but he will gad them back.
Egads. And it's nice to see a little bit of Jacob's humor, because I've gotten the impression, not that he's a trickster, but that he does have a sense of humor. And it's nice to see some of that in this passage. We don't really get much of that as English readers for the Bible. A lot of the poetry, a lot of the beauty of the language, a lot of the meanings don't really translate well for us.
Yeah, we wouldn't have gotten that kind of hilarity without doing a word study. And I'm not saying you should go in and look for these types of things in the Bible, but God does leave us little giggle spots where we can smile and be like, okay, it's not that serious. All right, anything else on Gad? So we're going to move on to Asher. I love Asher. I have a friend who named her son Asher, and I love it because Asher is one of the tribes who directly gets to interact with Jesus through Anna, and that's one of the only female prophets that we get to hear about in the New Testament. So I love that. But in verse 20, Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal delicacies. Another short one. It's interesting because Asher's name means like just happy. So he's just a happy guy. And I think the promise here that that Jacob is giving Asher is you're going to stay happy. And that's sweet because of all of the brothers, you don't get a lot of like happy joy or innocence. Like Benjamin is infantilized, but that's not the same as being happy. So Asher gets fertile land. His land is known for high quality olive oil in tradition and in extra biblical texts. He has high value trade, and historically and traditionally his daughters were married off as being like high value women to royalty because of the wealth of the land of Asher and the trades that he was known for. Simple life, happy life.
They could cook. This tribe didn't know. They can host them dinner parties.
The Jewish traditions say some funny things like the fancies of the monarchies or whatever. It's like just funny little Mr. Collins and his sweet musing. But next is Naphtali. This is where I was like, what in the Song of Songs? So verse 21, Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns. Why is he calling Naphtali a lady deer?
Again, another constellation.
So the Hebrew word for fawns could also mean words. So maybe Naphtali is like a poet or a writer or storyteller. We don't know for sure. This is another part where the words get a little bit messy and you have to come to your own conclusion based on your own research. He landed in northern Galilee, which was known as wilderness. Some rabbinic teachings claim that Deborah's song was written in Naphtali's land. And I would say out of all of the blessings, this one is the most confusing to me because I don't understand why it's prophetic or a blessing because we don't have anything else in scripture to confirm it. So it is what it is. Naphtali was a beautiful mommy deer or writer.
They were just free of spirit and beautiful. They were frolicking around in the wilderness and the lilies of the field.
And that concludes all of the children born to Jacob outside of Rachel.
So now we get to the ones that actually matter.
His favorites.
So we have verse 22. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall. The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, and harassed him severely. Yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. By the God of your father who will help you, by the Almighty who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that crouches beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of your father are mighty beyond the blessings of my parents, up to the bounties of the everlasting hills. May they be on the head of Joseph and on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers. And so if you're listening and not reading along, he is a fruitful bough. Okay, so that's a branch of a tree, yet his bow and arrow remained unmoved. It's a weird wordplay considering it's in English, but there you go. So what does all of it mean?
Yeah, this one was weird for me because there's no prophetic lineage of Joseph at all, yet he spends the most time on Joseph. We know he's Jacob's favorite, but what of this comes to fruition in Jewish history?
I see running through it, Joseph is fruitful. We know that he's fruitful. He's very fruitful for Pharaoh, if nothing else, but he's a very successful man. And then we see the archers bitterly attacked him. We hear of the trials that Joseph faced, and I think his dad is acknowledging that your life was hard, right? But then he's going on to say, I'm going to bless you more than even my father's ever blessed anybody. And then he talks about like womanly blessing. And it's just very strange. And I don't get a lot of like future promise. It seems very present tense just within Joseph's lifetime.
Yeah, I do get the impression this is, one, because of how long it is, but two, because of how personal it is and how this doesn't seem to be talking about Joseph in the future. This doesn't seem to be so much prophetic as it is an actual blessing. Like, effectively, this is the blessing of the firstborn, the thing that he would be giving to the person that he actually loves, that he has chosen as his. And also, it seems to be a lot of praise. And to be fair, Joseph has done a lot of good stuff that does deserve praise.
Out of all of the brothers, he's definitely got the most integrity.
But yeah, it doesn't seem like this is talking much about his inheritance except for the hills. And I also think that it's interesting that the concept of the bow is brought up, because in the previous chapter, I think, it was where Jacob gave Joseph his inheritance, the only thing of the land that he could give, which he specifically said that he took with his bow. And so in many ways, he's tying Joseph to himself and tying the accomplishments of Joseph and the only inheritance he can give to him, like between him and Joseph. Like, that's the connection. So I see a lot of that, but yeah, it's very different from what we've seen up to this point. And it's hard to say that this is even a prophecy.
Yeah, I see a lot of fertility talk here, like blessings of the breasts and of the womb. That's fertility. Now, if we want to interpret it as Joseph's wife was super cool or whatever, like very fertile, great mom, none of the struggles that Rachel had kind of stuff. Okay, cool. I could see that being meaningful because Jacob understood the struggles of infertility. But also, this could mean so much more than that, because the breasts and the womb are symbolic of fulfillment outside of childbearing. And this goes into the be fruitful and multiply that we've seen repeatedly in Genesis, both earlier than Jacob, but also coming from Jacob, and the fruitfulness and multiplication that happens within Egypt. I'm not taking this just as womanly fertility like Leah and Rachel were so obsessed with. I feel like this is generationally breaking away from that and saying that you can do more than have babies.
I think it is also colorfully and poetically making the point that Joseph is separate from the family. Like, if you once again look at the footnote provided here when it's talking about a bough and a branch and all that, for some reason it also could be interpreted as donkey, like a wild donkey and colts and whatnot. Regardless of which direction you go, it's talking about this bough, this offshoot going over a wall. And at the very end, it talks about how he's different from his brothers. He is set apart from his brothers. So again, we've talked about this so many times at this point. I don't think it bears that much repeating. But Joseph, in his second dream, seems to be separate from his brothers.
That's the very end of verse 26. And on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers.
Yes. And I think Jacob is establishing, yes, you're not part of your brothers. He loves Joseph, and Joseph has done a lot of beautiful, amazing things, and he's a great guy. And yeah, he made a lot of mistakes too when he ultimately has effectively sold his family into slavery, but he's still a guy who's done a lot of good. And Jacob wants him to be blessed for that, and also he loves him.
Jacob also says that he is by a spring. This is the water reference. So with Reuben, he is as unstable as water. He is the embodiment of the chaos waters. But then you have the spring. The spring is the imagery of eternal life, of God, of wisdom, of integrity. And so he's blessing Joseph, similar to the way that his firstborn should have been blessed, but they oppose each other.
Oh, it's interesting too, because if the donkey is the colt is the translation there, and then the colt and Judah's prophetic
in the vine,
the choice vine. So is he calling to Joseph being grafted into the choice vine through Judah at the end?
That could be prophetic. It's interesting you say it that way. Like, I hadn't really considered that, but it gives hope to Joseph that he has been separated from his family. He is the vine that extends over the wall. He is set apart, but it's possible for him to be grafted back in.
That would also follow the genealogies in Revelation too, when Joseph is out of the genealogies basically from this point forward, but in Revelation is back in at the end after the scepter has passed to Christ.
Did you come up with that just now?
Yeah.
That's really good. I like that.
Brilliant.
I really like that.
So that would be Jacob tying his... I only came up with that because you mentioned it, the colt translation there, which is not in the text.
Thank you, ESV.
I'm on the ESV.
You really let me down tonight.
But then we got one more, unless there's more on Joseph.
No, let me double check. Oh, plus, Benny's plus, he also got that little mountainside in the last chapter.
And he's making this mountain. Like, this must be a beautiful mountain because
it better be.
Jacob is just talking this mountainside up.
Anyway.
Almost like a little humble brag in here too, because 26, the blessing of your father are mighty beyond the blessing of my parents.
Yeah, because you stole it, bro. All right. Benjamin, this makes my heart happy here, okay? Because we hear about Benjamin as the boy up until this point. And here in verse 27, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at evening dividing the spoil. That ain't no little baby boy.
Is this another constellation?
Perchance.
You tell us, Cody, is it?
Yes.
So this is not a childish boy. This is a fierce warrior. We know that this man has fathered like a dozen sons by the time he comes to Egypt. He is a man who finishes what he starts. That is what Jacob is saying about him. In the morning, he devours the prey. At the evening, he divides the spoil. He is a hard worker. He doesn't leave jobs unfinished. And then a lot of lineage in the Bible prove this prophecy to be true via Judges chapters 3 and 20 and 1 Samuel. So this is beautiful because I almost wonder if without Joseph, Benjamin never would have gotten to come into the fulfillment of this identity. Like, I wonder if he would have held himself back for the betterment of his father, the comfort of his father. But now his father is releasing him to be this wild wolf man that he can be. And it's beautiful. I love that.
Kind of fits into Jacob's renaming of Benjamin, the strength of his right hand, which I think is funny because isn't Benjamin the one who's biblically referenced to be left-handed?
No, it's his great grandchild.
Well, not Benjamin. The tribe of Benjamin, I think, is...
It's known for a left-handed warrior.
Yeah. But he's right.
Yes, it is ironic.
There's got to be some sort of Hebrew play on irony there.
That's God smiling and chuckling. It's like Gad.
The unfortunate thing, though, about this blessing is it's not necessarily good. And I would say that for many of these guys, wealth in and of itself is not good or bad. It just is. And when we see We will see that as Benjamin grows and eventually comes into the promised land, there's a lot of trouble that develops because of Benjamin's kind of more rash warrior nature, and it leads to the tribe almost being completely wiped out at one point.
But they do repent.
They do.
So,
Unlike Dan.
Stupid
dang it, Dan. Why can't you be like your brother? So this is the end, the conclusion of the poem. And then we go into a few verses about Jacob's death and burial. So all these are the 12 tribes of Israel. This is what their father said to them as he blessed them, blessing each with the blessing suitable to him. Then he commanded them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field at Machpelah, to the east of Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite to possess as a burying place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is in it were bought from the Hittites. When Jacob finished commanding his sons, he drew up his feet into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people. So one, gathered to his people hints to me at what you were talking about before, this connection to an afterlife that is so frequently ignored and denied in ancient Judaism. But also, it's a third attempt to get his sons to bury him in this place. So first, he made a covenant with Joseph to be buried there. Then he made him swear on top of it. And now again, he's reiterating it in front of all of his sons. Hey, this is where you got to take me. And then he dies.
Yeah, and he was gathered to his people. Yeah, this was the other reference, I think, more so to the afterlife that Jews believed, or before that even, the patriarchs believed and had this idea of afterlife. And we traced Jacob's story. He talked about Sheol a lot. This was not a void concept to them. Bart Ehrman, I think, is one of the ones who just pushes this idea that the afterlife and resurrection after death was a purely New Testament idea, and it's not.
Yeah, obviously not. And I know there are some Christians who talk about soul sleep and all that jazz. No, I don't buy that either. I'm sorry, I don't. And when I see him talking about being gathered to his ancestors, about being gathered to his people, like that's, I don't see any other way to look at it aside from literally going to the world after. And it seems like something he's looking at with fondness. He's not going into death afraid. It seems like he knows what to expect, and in some ways he's very happy to go.
But he gives them a very detailed history of the significance of this burial site. And I think that's his way of trying to impart one last time the history and richness of this family under the covenant. Yeah, you guys have all these futures, and I'm speaking prophetically over you, but don't forget where you come from. Don't forget your father's fathers.
The point is to not Manasseh, to not forget. And all of the brothers at one time or another kind of struggle with this, and their descendants struggle with this. But as fractured as they all become, they're still one nation. And God remembers his covenant with them, and he remembers his people, even when they forget it, even when they fracture beyond all hope of reconciliation in the future, and they become basically two nations. They still remember, they still know, they still have a shared history, even though they know that they're broken apart. They remember. Though they have two different lines of kings, they remember that they're brothers. And it's sad, it's sad knowing what's coming, just how bad things will get for them eventually. After the time of the judges, and such a short period of time with their kings, everything just falls apart. But for a long time, even though there's a cycle of falling away, no matter what, they always seem to remember. They all seem to get back together, united under someone who reports to God. God always reminds them.
And eventually, Shiloh becomes a place where they go and they show that faithfulness. So that ties it all together. It's also my baby. Is that where we're at? Is that it?
I think so.
Unless you want me to wrap up all of the astronomy or astrology stuff.
Yes.
You might want to, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I brought all the astrology up here is not to get into this weird new agey stuff. And if you look it up, it's dramatically different than what we experience it as today, and very biblical. I think we touched on it a little bit, but this wraps in Joseph's dream, the covenantal line, like all of that is within this prophecy being in a cosmic position with the astrology that that Jacob is presenting here. And the signs in the heavens and these tribes are supposed to be pointing to God. And then all of the just crazy, the 12 crowns in Revelation and the birth of Christ and that being seen in the stars is all pointing to God. And I think it's very poetic how that all ties into this first book of the Bible and the end of Jacob's life and the start of the tribal Israel that is going to produce and point to the Messiah.
Yeah, Michael Heiser does a very good breakdown of Jewish astrology. And again, it sucks calling it astrology because it is technically what it is, but it's not what it is. It's not
it's
modern.
stigmatized.
Yeah, it's not modern astrology.
But so this is a good point to make, because this is why knowing and interpretations and translations, like we have a terrible association with astrology because what we know astrology to be, but that is not what it is to these people.
No, and there are a lot of things that are said in Revelation you won't understand unless you have the Jewish understanding of what astrology was. I believe we talked about this in the Christmas episode, where Heiser argues that John in Revelation is talking about in a section where it talks about the virgin and she's crowned with 12 stars and the sun is in her midst and the moon is at her feet. And there's the dragon that comes to swallow her up and all kinds of different images. There was a specific setup of constellations that the Jews would have known. And more than that, that also, like the Babylonians would have known. The Magi coming from the east, they would have known about the significance of these constellations. And when they see all these constellations lining up, and Virgo, the Virgin with the sun in her midst and the moon at her feet, and all of these different things showing up, it meant something to these people. It was communicating something massive on a universal, beyond universal scale was happening. And so the whole world, it talks about how the whole world was expecting something to happen. And it wasn't just because of the prophecy in Daniel, although that was a big part of it. It's that people were looking up at the heavens. The heavens declare the glory of God. It was literally declaring the arrival of God. And we are told the heavenly host show up. We're told a star in the sky shines over. What does that even mean? There are all kinds of things that you just won't get unless you look at it through the eyes of a Jew of the first century, who would have had an understanding of astrology very different to what we have.
We've bastardized astrology is what we've done. So we've created something that points to our own ego and our own longings and our own desires because it's convenient and it satisfies us in a fleshly way, a hedonistic way, as opposed to pointing to God, drawing glory to God and away from ourselves. So essentially, we've put ourselves in the place of God. That should make you uncomfortable. If that's the type of astrology that you're practicing, you should stop. And if you're uncomfortable with the word astrology, you should look at it from the biblical perspective, not the pagan New Age perspective, because they're two completely different practices.
If you look at anything, like we've talked about the divine council, you have these angels like that are supposed to be representations for God pointing in the right direction. They don't do that. It is twisted. They are worshipped. Then you have the same with the signs in the heavens, supposed to be pointing to God, that we end up, I'm going to have a bad day today because I'm an Aquarius and there's signs in torment today or something. But is something that was perverted from the original intent of, I believe God intended these to foretell certain things. Like we see that in Revelation. We see
For confirmation.
Yeah, we see Daniel, the Heiser's work, and I don't even know if it's truly his work, but what he traces out is mind-boggling if you follow that.
And to be fair, I think a lot of the aversion to all forms of astrology, one, it's because there's the perverted version today, and so we assume everything has always been that way when it hasn't. But two, we're like, stars are just big balls of gas burning millions and millions of light years away. So like, what does it matter? One, we're still told in the Bible the heavens declare. But also, the Bible understands stars to be something different from what we describe them today. And there was a time where that made me uncomfortable too. It's like, we know what stars are. C.S. Lewis puts that into perspective. It's like, we know what they're made of, and maybe we know what they're made of. But assuming we're right about what they're made of, we're made of atoms. We're made of physical material. We're more than that. Stars are more than just big balls of gas. They're meant to do something. They're meant to serve a purpose.
Yeah, if you're a Christian and you look at the world and you're like, yeah, God was just like, today I don't feel like being that creative. Let's just not make that have a purpose. Everything has a purpose.
Yeah, they're just meant to be little lights in the skies. And I feel like also, in many ways, we have killed the heavens. We have so much light pollution that when we look up at the sky, we just see these little tiny dots, and it takes away so much from the beauty and grandeur of what the heavens truly are.
I think, okay, this is the tinfoil hat, Gina, so prepare yourself. But I truly believe that the powers that be in the world today, with technology especially, are designed to distract us and honestly make it impossible to see the real heavens. If we could see the real heavens, we could see confirmation of things in the Bible that we can't see, because there's space stations and satellites and things that confuse us. Like the night that Cody proposed to me, it was all a ploy. And he was like, oh, look, a shooting star. And it was actually an airplane. And then we argued because I was like, you're stupid. It's an airplane. And actually he was tricking me so that I was distracted so he could go down on one knee. But I digress. We can't. It's impossible to see the sky in its purest form. I can't think of a time or place where I've been able to, because if it wasn't for weather or cloud coverage or light pollution, it was for something else. There is no clear, perfect sky that's accessible to all of mankind.
No, and I think it's part of the reason why, that the ancient world could walk outside and just see the glory of God painted in the sky. And we've been to dark night sky zones and seen the Milky Way with a naked eye, and that's magnificent, but there's still light pollution that even affects what we're seeing, and different object pollution like the satellites and all of that takes away from what we experience. And I think there would be more people humbled by the vastness of the world that we live, like the cosmos that we live in, if they could walk outside and see galaxies with the naked eye, if they could understand the function of the stars, like the craziness of the patterns of the stars, and that not just recently we've traced these, but for millennia, people have been tracing the movements of the stars to track time, to track the navigating the earth was done by the stars. Sailors would use that as means to tell where they're at and how to get to places.
You mean we used to rely on God and not technology ourselves, phones, for directions?
Yeah.
He used to instruct our every step.
Yeah.
Could you imagine that level of dependence?
It's scary.
So there's nothing wrong with people wanting to build a better world for their children. And for generation upon generation, we've been building this kind of pyramid of technology. We've been developing it to solve a series of problems that are problems that have caused issues, shortages of food, not being able to work during the night. We've created lights and we've conquered the night, so to speak. And we've conquered all manner of diseases, and we've conquered hunger in so many ways. And yet, with each movement, this bit of progress, seems to in many ways push us farther and farther from the beauty that's inherent in the world, that clearly points us to God. I'm not saying that technology is wrong. I'm not saying we should all be Luddites who reject every kind of comfort today, and I don't know that any of us would anyway. I'm not going to go throw my phone out my car window tonight and then crash my car in a lake and then walk out into the middle of the desert.
No, we're making an announcement. We're starting a cult.
You're all invited. But the trouble is that, and even the Bible recognizes this with the concept of fasting, and also in books like Job, there are certain aspects of God you will not know as long as you're comfortable. You have to make yourself uncomfortable to get to see certain parts of God you won't ever see any other way. God, whether he's hiding himself from you or you're hiding yourself from him, when you're at a point where you're in true discomfort, where you lack the comforts of the modern day, you will suddenly see God in a different way, in a more complete way. And I think there's a reason why we see a pursuit of God that is so ravenous in so many countries where persecution is so high. We saw belief in God and practices that honored God exploding in the earliest days of the church when they were being fed to lions and thrown in coliseums. And today we see the Western church kind of struggling, whereas the church in China is doing amazingly. Like, why? I do think in many ways we have killed the sky. We've made it so we can't hear him or see him. And in many ways, we're happy with that. And I can't throw stones. Like, I indulge in all this too.
We've gotten to this place, like in the line that we've been tracing with Joseph, like the elevation above the stars. We've put ourselves in that position to not have to rely on God. We can feed ourselves. Like we work by the sweat of our brow. We provide our own food. We make our way. We hustle. We are self-made individuals in the West, and that's what we like to call ourselves. And that's one of the things that Gina and I learned through being jobless for a year and a half is like the reliance on the Lord is much, you're forced into it in that situation. And before that, like, I didn't understand the reliance on the Lord like I did after. And we don't, and most Westerners don't know relying on the Lord for the next meal. They don't relying on the Lord for the safety of their family. Like, we can walk around relatively safe in the US and not have to really worry about it. That's not the same for a lot of these countries that are thriving in Christianity, because I think, like Israel is being set up for in the next book, having to rely on the Lord and are going to do great things when they fully commit to relying on the Lord.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our podcast today. If you liked what you heard, please feel free to subscribe and share and leave a positive review. And if you would like to connect with us on social media, you can do so on Instagram and Facebook at The Logic of God. You can also send us an email at main.thelogicofgod@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. We hope you have a great day.